Wow, what a morning, huh? I didn't want to leave until the tornado warning and tornado siren were over this morning. I didn't want to leave my family rushing down to the basement, and I'm traveling here to church, so I waited, and boy, I just made it in at the last second. So thank you, Unity Band, and thank you, Seth. That was awesome. Don't we have the most wonderful people here? You know, we had a family reunion yesterday on my mom's side, and it happens once a year, and this year it was in Springfield, and Sue and I did it, and along with my sisters, and have a few of them here this morning. I just want to welcome my sister Kathy, and my daughter Joachim, and my son Chris, and so glad they're here this morning to celebrate with us. So, and good morning to all of you. I know I didn't expect too many people to show up today. It really was quite a storm. So thank you so much for taking the time and braving the weather and coming on in today. Today's talk is Father, Mother, God. I believe the male writer of Genesis misunderstood. You see, Genesis said we all came from Adam and Eve. Eve coming from Adam's rib, and scholars believe this is allegorical. You see, I believe God made the perfect human. And when he did, he was amazed. And he proclaimed, "Whoa, man!" And this phonetically became woman, then woman. And God told woman, "I'm going to make you an opposite." And she said, "God, why?" So God stirred the chromosomal pot. Now for a quick science lesson. We know the difference between the biological sexes is determined by the 23rd pair of chromosomes. A female typically inherits 2 X chromosomes, while the male has 1 Y and 1 X chromosome. The Y chromosome triggers male development. And God said it was good, kind of. Today, this perfect half of the world's population still looks at the male half. And they shake their head and they whisper under their breath, "God, why?" And that's how it became known as the Y chromosome. Sue particularly loves my dad jokes. Today's Father's Day, as you know, and I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Men never wanted to be recognized for this holiday. The first Mother's Day service was May 10th, 1908. In 1909, Sonora Dodd, who was raised by a single father, felt dads deserved a holiday just like moms did. She petitioned for the first Father's Day celebration and was held on June 19th, 1910. You'll be surprised to learn men and fathers actually fought against establishing Father's Day when it was first proposed. They scoffed at the idea of domesticating manliness with cards and gifts. They felt it was an unnecessary financial burden. However, commercial interests prevailed, especially following the Great Depression and World War II, cementing both the holidays. Now, we men, we already know our faults. And to all of you who had a father, I'm going to let you in on a little secret, another little secret. Contrary to advertising, most men really don't want gifts. If you must, go out and buy a cheap pair of socks, they'll be happy. The only gift men want is forgiveness. Forgiveness for all the dumb things we do and say during the course of the year. Give us a clean slate, best gift ever. If you ever really want to understand men, there was a Canadian show running from 91 to 2006. It's on PBS here. It nailed men perfectly. It was called The Red Green Show. The most important lesson comes from the end of every episode when the men of Possum Lodge stand and recite the man's prayer. I'm a man, but I can change if I have to, I guess. All self-deprecating jokes aside, I can't begin to tell you of all the wonderful men and fathers that I've met in my lifetime. There are so many incredible and loving fathers, many with us here today. And I want to acknowledge and honor every one of you. Happy Father's Day to fathers, grandfathers, stepfathers, mothers who were fathers, foster fathers, spiritual fathers, mentors, and all those who have shown up in our lives and helped guide us. And that includes everyone here. And because Father's Day carries many feelings, I also want to acknowledge those who miss someone today. Those whose relationships with fathers were complicated. And those who wish they had received something they never quite got. There's room here for every heart. Let me start off by saying probably the greatest compliment I could ever receive is if I was called a good father. I've worn many hats in my lifetime, but this role to me carries the most weight. Likewise, the most hurtful comment I could receive would be as if they said I was not. So a talk on Father's Day, being a very earthly father myself, is quite significant to me. Each and every one of you has a biological father. It says so on your birth certificate. But there's a difference between being just a biological father and being a good dad. Each and every one of you has played a fatherly role in at least someone's life, probably many people. I have seen far better fathers from women and mentors than some biological fathers. You see, life is complex. Not everyone had the same kind of father. Some had fathers who were loving and present. Some had fathers who worked endlessly to provide. Some had fathers who struggled, who were absent, who left too early. Some were raised by grandparents, by mothers. Some by teachers, coaches, neighbors, friends. And some still quietly carry the same questions. Why wasn't I enough? Why wasn't he there? So before we go any further today, I want to say this. There's room here for all of it. There's room here for gratitude. There's room here for pain. And there's especially room for healing. Because Father's Day is not one story. It's many stories. Because whether fathers succeeded perfectly or imperfectly, what we're often looking for was something deeper. We're looking for blessing. The blessing every heart wants. Psychologists talk about attachment. Spiritual traditions talk about blessing. Different language, same human longing. Every child asks, am I enough? Are you glad I'm here? We spend years pretending we don't need these questions answered. And then we become adults and we discover we're still asking them. Maybe through relationships, through achievement, maybe through approval. We're still asking, do I matter? Many of us received some form of blessing. Maybe your father said, I'm proud of you. Maybe he taught by example. Maybe he worked long hours. Maybe he showed up at every game. Maybe he fixed things. Maybe he wasn't expressive with words. But his love was visible in action. My grandfather's generation often had a difficult relationship with emotion. Some men could rebuild an engine blindfolded, but saying, I love you, seemed like an insurmountable mountain to climb. Love sometimes sounded like, did you eat? Or call me when you get home. Love sounded like, I changed your oil. Different language, same love. Some fathers blessed us through their presence, and if you receive that blessing, give thanks. But many people carry another story, the father wound. And I say that gently because wounds come in many forms. Absence, criticism, distance, anger, addiction, neglect, and commonly, silence. Sometimes the father didn't know how to give what he himself never received. Pain can travel through generations. A man raised without tenderness may struggle to offer tenderness. A man raised with fear may struggle to offer peace. Sometimes people give what they have, even when what they have isn't enough. And here's the difficult truth. Unhealed pain often becomes inherited pain unless someone interrupts it. A father repeatedly yelled at his son over small mistakes. Years later, his adult son found himself doing the same thing with his own child. One day he stopped in the middle of raising his voice, and he heard himself. Not his own voice, his father's voice. And he realized, I don't have to pass this on. That moment changed everything. That adult son was me. Charles Fillmore taught we're not bound by the mistakes of yesterday. Unity never denies wounds, but unity also says the past does not possess ultimate authority over your life. You may inherit patterns, but you don't have to keep them. You may inherit fear. You can choose faith. You may inherit criticism, but you can choose compassion. You may inherit silence, but you can choose love. Spirit continually creates new possibilities. Unity has a beautiful idea. God is Father, Mother. Not a distant man in the sky. Not limited by human categories. The Father aspect represents wisdom, direction, strength. The Mother aspect represents love, compassion, nurturing. Together they create a beautiful wholeness. Here's the beautiful thing. Many people become the blessing they never received. They become extraordinary parents, extraordinary mentors, and extraordinary friends because they quietly say, it stops with me. I choose love. I choose presence. I choose encouragement. And what a sacred thing that is. Perhaps today Spirit asks us, who blessed me? Who wounded me? What do I want to carry forward? What do I want to release? Because Father's Day isn't simply about fathers. It's about the fathering spirit within all of us. The ability to guide, encourage, protect, to believe in, to love. Okay, there we go. This is a view from 1954. Dad, Mom, and baby Paul standing in the driveway of my grandparents' residence. My dad was a good person. He didn't smoke, drink, gamble, or swear. He always provided for the family in a very responsible way. He was raised Pentecostal. He was strict. His words could hurt. I truly believe he was taught and carried on the belief that praise would somehow harmfully inflate the ego and hurt the child. My dad, showing frustration with me, would occasionally say, "You are not helpless, you're hopeless." And that carried with me for decades. My dad came from a generation who believed that sparing the rod would spoil the child, and that rod was bestowed upon me sometimes. Today we'd probably call it harm. But back then I felt it was a fairly common practice. There's never just one story in our upbringing, is there? We see things quite differently when we're young and not fully developed. And young parents often aren't taught and prepared how to be the perfect parent. Often they carry the patterns of many previous generations, and those patterns can sometimes be hurtful. And that's why it's important to own the generational patterns when you see them. It's important to know you have a choice. You can say it stops with me and start healing the things that need to be healed so you can be healthy and happy. No matter the hurts I experienced, though, I knew Dad always loved us. He nor Mom ever once said, "I love you," or "I'm proud of you." But he was able to express love in other ways. He regularly attended my ball games and played catch with me often. He cooked meals for us, took us on vacations, took us camping and fishing, took us out for ice cream. He always took us to church to help us have moral guidance and direction. He worked hard his entire life, but probably his greatest asset was that he was always there. As I got older, I grew away from my parents. I joined a yoga group from India. I left when I was 17. I finished school while working and quit the church. For my parents, Dad especially, that was really hard. I felt like my dad didn't understand me, and we drifted apart. After putting myself through college, we slowly started building a real relationship. Because I moved out of state, we saw each other infrequently, but there was always positive growth in our bond. I married and started my own family. When I became ill with cancer, that brought us still closer. The temporariness of life became real. I recognized the importance of the man in my life. One day in 1992, I received a call. My father had unexpectedly died. He was 64 and just retired. No one saw it coming. I called him the night before and told him that I'd see him that coming weekend, and I did. But he was in a casket at the funeral home. There was no more bonding, no more relational growth. There was no more active love. It was quietly, unceremoniously over. And I still had many things to ask, to learn, to heal. I've had 2 readings from 2 different loving mediums in my life. Both were significant events, and both dealt with fathers. My first experience came when I met a young woman at a retreat. 2 years prior, she died on the operating table. 15 minutes later, they revived her. When she came back, she had psychic abilities. She didn't want them. She could see and talk with those from the other side. For a while, she worked with law enforcement, finding the perpetrators of violent crimes, but it became too hard for her, so she stopped. At the retreat, she told everyone, "Don't ask for a reading because I'm not going to do it." When I told her of my unfinished business relationship with my father, she reiterated, "No." When the retreat was finished and everyone had left and it was only her and me, she grabbed me by the arm and she said, "Come on, let's do this." Sitting in the screened-in porch of my cabin, she said, "Your father is here. He's standing right beside you now. He had his hand on your shoulder. And he's saying something that I don't understand, but I'm going to tell you anyway. He says, 'I'm sorry about the tools. You see, my father wanted me to have his tools when he died. I found that out after his death, but my mother couldn't tolerate the thought of releasing the tools from his shop. That was the only place she could go to feel his presence. She wasn't ready to release them. Only her and I knew this. When I heard this from my medium friend, I wept because I knew what she was saying was real. The last thing she said that my father wanted to say to me was, "I love you very much. And I want you to know you're doing everything right." My father's healing was complete. The second time I interacted with a medium was right here on this stage. Stephanie Barton had come to give a talk, and she said a Richard wanted to speak. No one moved until Sue sheepishly raised her hand. I looked at her confused, and Sue said, "That's my dad." I had known of him as Dick. Sue started walking to the stage when Stephanie said, "Paul, come up here." I protested, saying, "I never met Sue's father." Stephanie loudly proclaimed, "Well, he knows you." Stephanie started telling me things that Richard was relaying to her, telling her specific things about me that only a few knew. He said he was instrumental in bringing the two of us together. I knew from that moment the importance of my father-in-law in my marriage and in my life. Again, what a beautiful message from a father that I never knew. Okay, not sure. There we go. Charles Fillmore often taught that prayer was not persuading God. Prayer was aligning ourselves with divine mind. The problem isn't that God isn't speaking. The problem is that we often have too much static. Fear speaks. Shame speaks. Past experiences speak. Inner critics speak. And sometimes the voice of Spirit becomes difficult to hear. Years ago, people listened to radios with tuning dials. If the station wasn't tuned correctly, you heard static. Unity says divine love is always broadcasting. Peace is broadcasting. Guidance. Wisdom is always broadcasting. Our work becomes tuning inward. What does the Heavenly Father's voice sound like? How do we recognize the voice of Spirit? The Heavenly Father's voice does not sound like shame. Shame says you're the mistake. God says you made a mistake, but you're still whole. Fear says you cannot do this. Spirit says, I'm with you. You got this. Condemnation says you'll never change. God says growth is already unfolding. Criticism says you're not enough. Spirit says you're beloved. When Dad says you're not helpless, you're hopeless, God says you are helpful and you bring people hope. Okay. As a teacher, I handed students blank sheets of paper with a tiny black dot in the center. I asked, what do you see? Every student said, a black dot. No one noticed the enormous space around it. You see, many people do that with themselves. They focus on one flaw, one mistake, one regret, one wound. Meanwhile, Spirit sees an entire soul. Spirit sees possibility. God sees beauty. Spirit sees belovedness. My friends, I invite you to close your eyes. Sweet Spirit, sweet God, we give thanks for every expression of love and guidance in our lives. We bless fathers. We bless mothers. We bless mentors, and teachers, and friends. We bless those who stood beside us when we needed strength. We hold with tenderness the places with us that still hurt. We release old burdens. We release old pain. We release the stories that say we're not enough. We listen now for eternal blessings spoken over every soul. You are beloved. You are worthy. You're whole. You're enough. May divine wisdom guide us. May divine love heal us. May we become blessings always in the world. And so it is. Amen. I want to leave you with one last parting piece of advice that my father gave to me when I was young. He told me, son, make a decision. The road is paved with dead squirrels who couldn't decide what to do. So go forth this week, deciding to live your life in joy. You've only this life to live. And I want to thank you. Namaste.